Well, good afternoon, dear friends and colleagues. Thank you very much for joining us for this afternoon's session on polar science diplomacy and an ever-changing world order. And I'm very happy to see good colleagues, familiar faces, and also many new faces. And I'm of course very, very grateful to the collaboration of the Royal Danish Academy, and I'm very happy and grateful to see good friends and colleagues from Arctic and Polar Affairs who accepted the invitation to join this event today. So we all just listened to an incredibly thought-provoking keynote, which also takes us we're a little bit delayed in relation to the program. So we'll have to be efficient. But that keynote was, of course, extremely inspiring. And I'll jump right into my own introductory remarks, which in many ways follow from the keynote we just heard. My name is Rasmus Gersø Bertelsen. I'm Danish, but I'm a professor of Arctic International Relations at the Arctic University of Norway in Tromsø. My area of research is general Arctic international relations, and very much the place of the Arctic in international order. And the Arctic polar regions, they always reflect international order. I'm extremely skeptical about the term of Arctic exceptionalism. And as a Scandinavian, as a Westerner, I think it's extremely important to be reminded of what the world looks like. And as I sometimes say to students, the world does not look like me. And of course, we have what the world looks like on the left here, which reminds us that the world is about 8 billion people, and perhaps 1 billion are in what we would call the West. And then a very rough approximation of international relations and political science, that international relations is about relative power. Relative power explains a lot in international relations. And relative power is, roughly speaking, population multiplied by economic development multiplied by science and technology. And of course the reason why the West has been so powerful is because we've been so wealthy and we have enjoyed very advanced science and technology, which we have often been able to translate into organized violence. And that, very rough approximation of international relations, of course also shows very clearly why science and technology and science diplomacy is very key to international relations. And of course, when the vast majority of humanity, when their economic conditions improve, when their science and technology improves, well, that of course changes the outcome of that approximation very much. And that's very much what international politics is about these days. And that is also what is shaping Arctic affairs, and it's what's shaping polar affairs. And I have deliberately named this session Polar Science Diplomacy and not Arctic Science Diplomacy, because I think it's very important to keep both the Arctic and Antarctic in mind. And I think that, especially as Scandinavians, as Nordics, when we go outside the Nordics, to countries like Poland, Italy, China, we will see that it's a polar approach. So I'm very, very happy to introduce this panel of friends and colleagues. First, former President of Iceland, Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, who of course is a very key person in Arctic affairs, the founder of the Arctic Circle Conference. Sara Olsvig, Inuit Circumpolar Council, Zhao Long from Shanghai Institutes of International Studies in Shanghai, Peter Sköld, professor at Umeå University, chair of European Polar Board, Danish, Professor Ólafur, Professor at University of Umeå, Chair of International Studies in Shanghai, Peter Sköld, professor at Umeå University, chair of European Polar Board, Danish, Professor at Umeå University, chair of European Polar Board, Dr. Monika Szkarłat, Marie Curie University, in Lublin, yeah. And finally, Dr. Francesca Tolve from the Italian Research Council. So I'd like to invite you for 5+ minutes, and I ask you to be very disciplined for introductory remarks before a broader discussion.
Was that an invitation for me to start? Or?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Well, I think you're correct. We have just come from extraordinary plenary sessions. First of all, we got what I would call a dressing down by the very distinguished African diplomat, warning us in Europe that we are basically missing the bus in terms of global science and our global position. It should be a wake-up call for us all. And I found it inspiring to hear the reaction in the hall, the extraordinary applause that followed that I have not for years heard such an advanced critical speech of the reigning policies in our part of the world so far as science and science diplomacy is actually conducted in practice. Secondly, before that, we listened to this extraordinary story of science diplomacy success with respect to North Korea. If we were going to list a country in terms of what would be the number one in terms of difficulties in conducting science with a country, I think North Korea would stand a good chance of being number one. But it was also very interesting to listen how the audience, this assembly here, welcomed that concrete example enthusiastically. So these two events that just happened this afternoon in the plenary session, I think should both of them be a wake-up call for the prevailing views of how we are conducting in Europe our science with respect to the rest of the world, including Russia and so on. And what I found interesting in the North Korean story was that the British authorities, the governments that had introduced sanctions on North Korea, and we all know that whole theater, they in the end agreed to give a green light on this cooperation because it was a volcano. It was a volcano. I mean, I come from the country that has the greatest number of volcanoes in Europe. So to me, this was inspiring news. But what will be my opening point to you here in this session is that the polar regions are as threatening to us, the human race, as the volcano in North Korea was a threat to the people of North Korea. There is no fundamental difference between the natural disasters caused by the melting of the ice in the polar regions, as could have been created by this, one of the biggest volcanoes on the planet, except that the consequences of the melting of the ice will be much more dramatic, will impact every country on the planet, every continent on the planet. Because the melting of the ice mass in the Arctic and Antarctica, but I will also include what my friends and your friends also call the third pole, the Himalayan area, where there are thousands and thousands of glaciers in the border areas between China, India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Afghanistan, and the water tower of Asia. And the melting of those glaciers will be, in my view, the first immediate colossal environmental disaster on the planet, affecting the food production and the livelihood of up to 3 billion people. 3 billion people. And let's not forget, there are 3 nuclear weapon states in that Himalaya third pole area. And at least one of them is not very stable. And we all know which one is that. So, one of the things I take from this afternoon is, why don't we make the polar regions or treat them in the same way as the North Korean volcano was treated? Because if we have already accepted, through this example of North Korea, that natural disasters take precedence over commercial sanctions, political aims, isolations, diplomatic isolations, and so on, in this case with respect to North Korea, why don't we also bring the polar region up to the same level and communicate to the rest of the world that scientific cooperation on the polar regions is accepted despite the geopolitical tensions, despite wars, despite conflicts, despite economic sanctions, and so on. We create a safe haven, a scientific safe haven for the polar regions. That's my proposition to this session, and I do it from the long experience of having founded the Arctic Circle, which has become the largest annual international gathering on the Arctic, with over 2,000 people, scientists, political leaders coming to Iceland every October, but also organizing forums of many hundreds of people, each of them in Asia, in America, in Europe, and elsewhere. And within the Arctic Circle, we now face the situation that if a young Inuit woman in a remote university in Yamanemets in Russia wants to attend the Arctic Circle Assembly, the officials from multitude of European foreign ministries say, okay, but then we are not going to come. Then we are not going to come. If a young female Inuit researcher from an obscure Siberian university in Russia will be among the participants in a side session, we are not going to come. That's the practical difficulties we face. We in Europe have created enormous barriers for scientific cooperation on the polar region. And the fundamental question that Europe has to face is that going to continue? And we justify it by the invasion in Ukraine, but behind that is also a reluctance to cooperate with Russia and China long before the war started. So don't let us fool ourselves that this is just about Ukraine. This is much deeper, as you reminded me as we walked in terms of the Arctic conference we both attended in China sort of 8 years ago. And I will just finish with this. If we want to acquire scientific knowledge on the polar regions, the strength of the scientific institutions in Asia and increasingly in the Middle East is now so comprehensive that we cannot gain a comprehensive view, scientific view of the Arctic or Antarctica, not to mention the third pole, unless we create a global polar science.
Thank you very much, Ólafur Ragnar. And I think it's very fitting to continue right with you, Sara, from Inuit Circumpolar Council. Please.
Rasmus, and thank you for the invitation to this conference. It's not very often that I'm at a conference where I only seem to know one person in the audience. Of course, this is not an Arctic conference. I mostly go to Arctic conferences, but it's a great pleasure to see new faces and so many also being interested in polar and Arctic issues. I'm the chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. We are an indigenous peoples organization, co-founder of the Arctic Council, and also have existed for almost 50 years, working across state borders in which Inuit live. So I'm from a very stable rock, mostly, Galatlit Nunat, Greenland. We don't have volcanoes. We do have other extreme weather events that are threatening lives and livelihoods. But Inuit do not only live in Galatliutinat, Greenland, we also live in Canada, Alaska, and Chukotka, Russia. And our organization has since 1977 brought together Inuit, including our Chukotkan members since 1992. But also prior to that and before the end of the Cold War, we had leaders who were doing diplomatic efforts to ensure that we were able to engage with Inuit on the Russian side. And my argument here in this panel is that indigenous diplomacy has been extremely important to the Arctic governance we see today. The map you see on the screen is the map of approximately the lands we live in and have been living in for millennia, migrating back and forth and also migrating in from the Siberian side towards Galatliutinat, Greenland. I like this map and I like to show it because it doesn't include the state borders. Of course, Inuit Circumpolar Council, we work within international law and we call for international law and order to be upheld. We as Inuit have experienced many things throughout our lifetimes, and this year has certainly been a special year when you are from Galatliutinat, Greenland. Our response from the Inuit Circumpolar Council was boiled down to two things. First of all, that there is no such thing as a better colonizer, but also that we call on all states to continue abiding by international law and order. I will take the next slide, please. I mentioned the Arctic Council, which Inuit Circumpolar Council is a co-founder of, together with the Sami Council, and also the then Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North. And I want to just begin by saying that the Arctic Council is alive and kicking. Just to paraphrase what the Arctic ambassador of the Kingdom of Denmark, Ambassador Høgh, has been saying at multiple conferences throughout this year since the Kingdom of Denmark took over the chairship. And this includes the 8 states and the 6 indigenous peoples organizations who are the decision makers of the Arctic Council. And this is a prime example of science diplomacy in effect, of how we are able to transcend those state borders and continue the cooperation, although of course not business as usual in these times, but continue a scientific and knowledge production cooperation within a governance body that was established, co-founded by indigenous peoples who live across state borders and who therefore from the beginning were bringing the message of the importance of being able to work across state borders when it comes to knowledge production. And this of course includes the knowledge of indigenous peoples, as you will also see in the statement that came out of the 14th Arctic Council meeting in May this year. So it's important to remember that the Arctic governance has a certain uniqueness to it. And I agree that the term Arctic exceptionalism is under very much, what would you call it? Like it's uncertain if you can say that there is an Arctic exceptionalism, but I do want to argue that the uniqueness of the Arctic in terms of governance structures is somehow still underpinning that Arctic exceptionalism, and it's not something that we see reported on much in media, but us who live it and who are there and in the machinery of the Arctic Council are continuously seeing how we are able to continue some of the most important projects under the auspices of the Arctic Council. These introductory remarks I will just conclude by a call. So next slide, please, or do I do this here? Okay. And that is for the science and research communities to look up our Inuit protocols for equitable and ethical engagement. Going back to the map you saw first, it's important to remember the role of exploration and science, knowledge production to colonization. And at some point, some years ago, the Inuit Circumpolar Council General Assembly, which consists of delegates from all over Inuit Nunat, called on the council to develop protocols to guide science and research communities to be more equitable and ethical in their approach to our homelands, to our knowledge, to the cooperation with us. And these protocols are protocols that we hope will be followed by all research communities, no matter where they are from in the world. They are basically a way to ensure that knowledge production and the science community approaches indigenous peoples with the rights of indigenous peoples front and center, turning around the history of knowledge production in the name of someone else's good. And I hope that that is something that more institutions will look to as you develop ethical guidelines, as we've seen being done at our own university in Galashiq, Greenland, and elsewhere. We've been successful in promoting the equitable and ethical engagement protocols in several processes that are ongoing, including the preparations for the 5th International Polar Year, which I sometimes, and some other people have dubbed the Indigenous Polar Year, which I think would be quite amazing if we were able to bring that actually to 2032-33 when the polar year happens. We've seen a big change from the previous 4 polar years in making sure that indigenous peoples, including the Inuit Circumpolar Council, are at the table in formulating what the goals of the polar year will be. But also in the International Conference on Arctic Research Planning, ICARP, and many other places. And finally, just also a reminder of the nice words that are actually in the newest resolution from the European Parliament on the Arctic, which includes highlighting the rights of indigenous peoples and indigenous knowledge. I read it with great interest, and I hope that everyone will take their time to look up what our own definitions of indigenous knowledge is. It is included, the definition we have, in the EEE protocols I just mentioned. And I think that there's a great gain for everyone, for the human kind as a whole, for us to look beyond what is, perceived as Western scientific knowledge, but also include and equitably utilize the knowledge of indigenous peoples, not just as an afterthought, but in the way that we produce knowledge altogether. So, in conclusion, we need a human rights approach to polar research at large. And polar science diplomacy, we have to remember, is not just state to state. It's also peoples to peoples with the S. And you can think about what the S means. And also, of course, Arctic indigenous diplomacy has been a driver and influenced deeply and a very important contributor to how we govern the Arctic and Arctic science today. And that needs to be highlighted and amplified in everywhere we go.
Thank you very much. And very happy to introduce our next speaker, Zhao Long. China has been mentioned a lot these days, today. Right. And I'm very happy that you accepted our invitation to join. And I cannot help think that Sara, Greenland has advocated very forcefully the nothing about us without us. I think China should take that up as well. Okay. Please.
Well, thank you, Rasmus. I'm deeply honored and pleased to join this panel and to this conference in general. And I'm really, it was a bit surprising to me because the main theme of this conference about European, science diplomacy, but China was most frequently mentioned in those past 2 plenary sessions as the external, actor here. But I'm also encouraged by those common understanding or even consensus, which suggesting that the disengagement on those scientific exchanges and collaboration does not make us stronger or even safer. So which I'm fully aligned with this idea. So maybe against this big context, it's better for me to share with you or to use China's engagement in polar issue as example to illustrate how does the science diplomacy could serve as the irreplaceable instrument for trust building and also for government supporting in this period of geopolitical uncertainties. So, China has always been regarded as the latecomer to polar scientific exploration because even compared to our neighbors, let's say Japan or South Korea, because our very first Antarctic expedition only took place in 1984. But I think over the past 4 decades, China has developed a quite sustained and increasingly institutionalized polar science programs. So by last year, we had conducted total of 40 Antarctic expeditions and 14 Arctic scientific expeditions. We have, of course, built the Yellow River stations in Svalbard, and more than 400 institutions nationwide and nearly 10,000 personnel have been participating in all different scientific programs. So I think that reflects this kind of a scale of continuity of China's engagement in polar activities really served as a foundation of China's polar science diplomacy. And then I think from the very beginning, China's polar engagement has been embedded, in my opinion, within the international legal and scientific framework, multilateral framework, starting by acceding to the Spitsbergen Treaty in 1925. Then China became a member to the International Arctic Science Committee, and then we also became, being accepted as the observer to the Arctic Council. So I think all those, you can see the developments reflect the fact that China recognizes the reality that we are not so-called an Arctic state. So the only pathway for us to be engaged in the Arctic affairs is to conduct bilateral or multilateral collaborations with Arctic states. And meanwhile, I think if you look at China's so-called white paper of Arctic policy, so China regarded himself as the important stakeholder in Arctic affairs and geographically speaking, near Arctic states. So all those, self-definition and principles of our polar activities were focused on how to better understand, protect, develop, and participate in the governance of both Arctic and Antarctic. So I think if you look at those milestone, events in China's participation in the Arctic affairs, starting from establishment of research stations to deployment of research vessels and constructions of observation facilities, all those developments have been anchored in or even driven by the scientific research collaboration. So that, I think, also reflect the consistent choice of China to participate through existing institutions rather the outside them or other framework. So China engages not only within the Arctic Council framework, but also actively participate to those multilateral dialogue platforms like Arctic Circle Assembly and Arctic Frontier. And we have managed to establish, together, of course, with our Nordic counterparts, a platform, so-called China Nordic Arctic Research Center. And next year in February, we are expecting the 11th China Nordic Arctic Cooperation Symposium will be hosted in Tromsø, Norway. So I think all those developments just reflect the fact that all this kind of a multilateral engagement provides a quite stable platform for China for joint researches, personal exchanges, and policy-relevant, scientific dialogue, which has this kind of a strategic imperative for China to be engaged in Arctic affairs. So I mentioned about Arctic Circle Assembly. Of course, we should give a great credit to our President Grímsson, because our institute also co-hosted, of course, by tireless support of President Grímsson. We co-hosted the so-called Arctic Circle China Forum before the pandemic in 2019 in Shanghai. And last year, we also co-hosted together with the Secretariat of Arctic Council, Arctic Circle Assembly, the thematic session entitled Joint Climate Action, Accelerating the Global Energy Transition in Reykjavik at the Arctic Circle Assembly, which I think those experiences demonstrate how polar science diplomacy can connect with those global agendas, climate issue, energy transition, etc., in more constructive and forward-looking manner. Well, I think last but not least, the credibility of science diplomacy from China's experience ultimately rests on the strength of scientific capacity. That's why China has invested heavily in those research capabilities. We have already established 5 Antarctic research stations and 2 Arctic research stations, and we have formulated integrated observation network. So I think that shows that China's polar science diplomacy is marked by very substantive and result-oriented cooperation. And of course, there's a discussion about the China's increasing presence in Antarctica, right? We have already 5 research stations in Antarctica. We are planning to establish the very new one by 2028. But I think the broader license we've received here is the effective science diplomacy is built through practice rather than declaratory statements. And second, the sustained investment in scientific capacity and infrastructure is essential for credible and responsible participation. And the last, I think, adherence to those multilateral frameworks and international law framework provides legitimacy and predictability for the countries like China, the outsiders, to participate in those polar issues. So I think, in short, the science diplomacy is not kind of a shortcut to navigate those geopolitical tensions. It really requires more long-term investment in shared knowledge, shared rules, and shared evidence, which precisely kind of a quite patient and enduring diplomacy that we needed for today. So perhaps I will stop here.
Thank you very much, and let's move on to Peter Sköld.
Okay.
And we lost some time. We got started late, and actually I also thought we were supposed to go on till 6:30, but perhaps that was a misunderstanding. So I'll have to ask the remaining speakers to be very concise and disciplined.
All right, I will do my best. Before I comment my slides, I did promise to give you an introduction to the organization I represent today, the European Polar Board, which I will very quickly do. But just following up on President Grímsson's comment here, I published my first scientific articles around the year when then the president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, gave his famous talk introducing the Arctic as the zone of peace and collaboration, not least for research purposes. And I must say not only that, but that encouraged me. So for 40 years I've been engaged in international Arctic science cooperation with the belief that we together actually can contribute to a better world. And we introduced Russia into our cooperation. We started some 15 years ago to work more intensively with China. And I'm sad to say that now I sit here with the notion that the scene has changed. It has changed. And I just hope it's temporary and that we can return to this positive and optimistic thinking again. At least that's the plan. The European Polar Board is an organization consisting of, let's see, oh no, yes, of 31 members representing 22 European countries, not only European Union countries, we also have UK, Norway, Switzerland, Iceland, Turkey and the Ukraine as member. And together these members perform a lot of hardcore polar research on polar stations, on icebreakers, and also land-based, of course. And the members are research institutes, but also ministries, funders, and operators. And we celebrate a 30-year anniversary this year. We started in 1995 as an advisory board to the European Science Foundation. We became an independent organization in 2016 or 15, and were then based in the Netherlands for 10 years. And then we moved the headquarters to Sweden, to Umeå, this year. And this represents a long-term track record of polar research cooperation, and with an aim to both for the Arctic and the Antarctic support information sharing, optimized infrastructures, and joint initiatives to accomplish more together than any single nation can do alone, and to make science relevant to the society, but also to make societies important and relevant to science. We must, of course, respond to the needs of societies all around us. And with this, we have established many initiatives and also structures. For example, the European Polar Coordination Office, EPCO, that we together with the Commission now form as a node for communication and collaboration, and coordinating all these many projects that are ongoing, and there is a strong need for that. And the results over these 30 years has proved that the use of infrastructures is really essential for cooperation, and how to utilize them in best way possible. How to inform policymakers on what is going on. Of course, a lot of what these researchers do is about climate change. And I don't need to tell you that even if we have been disrupted now by wars and other unfortunate issues, climate change is ongoing. We cannot believe that takes a break just because other things happen, and to remind not least the Commission and the European Union that there are environmental changes that are crucial for the globe's security, and that is also why much of this research focuses on risk management and assessments and monitoring and so on, to not only make this world more peaceful but also more secure. And we have then taken a number of initiatives recently approaching the Union to please don't forget the polar research in this time. And we managed to reassemble 900 signatures for an open call to secure Europe's leadership in polar research, and then also funding it through the Framework Programme 10. And this has then been repeated with a call to the European Union leaders, the MEPs, the Commission and Prime Minister's offices to secure long-term polar research funding. And this has also been repeated in September and October with response to the European Research Area Act, and a second reminder to the Commission to shape polar research in the Framework Program 10 and also in the MFF, the long-term economic strategy. And from the perspective of the EPB, the polar region is one of the clearest stress tests of whether science diplomacy can still hold the room together, as we say. So much is changing around us, but we really mean and believe that we can still stay together in joint efforts, maybe shaped a bit differently due to risk management and changing geopolitics, but still there is so much we can do together, and we should do it. And that this stress-tested model must also evolve globally. Thank you, Rasmus.
Thank you very much, Peter. That is how a very experienced educator goes through 15 slides in less than 7 minutes, very clearly.
That's true.
And before I give the word to Monika, you can ask questions online, and I have agreed with Jonas from the Royal Danish Academy that we let the scientific democracy rule. So vote for the questions. Put your questions, see people's questions, like them, and then we see what rises to the top. Monika, please.
Well, it's also,
okay.
Yeah, it's
So
that is the last.
okay, maybe Francesca, would you just like to go first, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, first of all, for... thank you. Is it this one? Okay, good afternoon, and thank you, first of all, for the invitation to participate in this important roundtable, this important session. So I am often asked, also today, why and what is Italy doing as a non-Arctic state in the polar regions? This is the reason why today I prepared a short presentation in order to show you what Italy is doing in the polar regions, also through the action of the National Research Council of Italy, and also under a science diplomacy perspective. So, as you may know, when we talk about CNR, we do refer to the largest research performing organization in Italy. Indeed, we are articulated in 7 thematic departments, and we have 88 research institutes which are distributed all over the national country, performing research activities in a wide and full range of scientific areas, including the environment, including the climate change that we know is the dominant driver in the polar regions. So CNR also established an ad hoc institute working on polar sciences, and this year we also created a polar hub in order to put under just a single umbrella all the activities that the National Research Council of Italy is performing in the polar regions. So basically, scientific research and diplomacy are the main drivers of the Italian presence in Arctic and in Antarctica. Well, to go a little bit more into details, let me tell you what we are doing in the Arctic region. Well, actually, CNR coordinates a multidisciplinary research station in Arctic, where Italian researchers are called to unlock the full potential of science in order to comprehend the phenomena related to climate change in Arctic, and also to provide answers. But so if the core activity of Italian researchers is that of performing research activities, they are also called to support the Italian government to unlock the full potential of science and to convert knowledge into action by providing scientific advice within the Italian national research program on Arctic, but also within the table instituted on Arctic, instituted by our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where science interact with the political and with the diplomatic dimensions, but also with the large Italian companies like Eni, like Fincantieri, that operate in Arctic. For instance, taking into consideration the role of Fincantieri in Arctic, they are cooperating with many polar nations, polar countries, in order to construct vessels that are suitable for polar navigation. Okay. Let me also say that Italy plays a constructive role also within the Arctic Council, as we got the status of observer since the year 2013, and we also actively participate to the working group that enrich the governance of the Arctic Council through the National Research Council of Italy, and in particular we contribute to the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, to the to the conservation of Arctic flora and fauna, and to the protection of the Arctic marine environment. So you know that Italy also elaborated a proper strategy on Arctic after having acquired the status of observer in the year 2016. But since then, we know that the world changed drastically. So we are now presenting and preparing a new strategy for Arctic that we will hopefully present on the occasion of the Arctic Circle Forum and Polar Dialogue that will be held for the first time next year in Italy in March, following the visit of President Grímsson to Italy and also the signature of this memorandum of understanding between the Arctic Circle and our Ministry of Research. Well, here you see the areas, I cannot read from here, but you can see the focus areas in which the forum will be organized, that will include science, diplomacy, education and research. CNR will play an important role as will be involved in the organization of the forum. The forum indeed will be held in CNR. But let's move now in Antarctica, what Italy is doing in Antarctica. At the beginning of December, we inaugurated a big exhibition in CNR in order to celebrate the 40 years of activity of Italy in Antarctica under our national program of Antarctica, which is a very good example on how scientific programs may serve as platform to build dialogue, to build trust, and to share responsibility. So the activity of Italy in these 40 years was supported by the funding of around 900 million euros that we invested in Antarctica, combining scientific expertise with meaningful geopolitical presence. And here I would like to raise a point that is related, of course, to science diplomacy, and that was already raised in the recent report of the Royal Society and of the American Academy of Sciences, that nowadays science cannot operate outside geopolitics. Here in this slide you see our Mario Zucchelli base, which is the Italian base in Antarctica. You also see the towers of the Concordia station, which is a station that we share with France. You also see our research vessel, Laura Bassi, which is the Italian icebreaker that has just started its campaign in Antarctica, supporting 5 research projects related to environment and to climate change. I'm concluding. Just let me mention you this initiative that is very important for us, that is our International School on Science Diplomacy, where Rasmus participated to the first edition. This is a school that is co-directed by CNR in cooperation with other relevant Italian and international institutions that you see here mentioned in this slide. We are now organizing the second session of this school that will be held in Sicily, in Erice, in October of next year, and we will have a special dedicated focus on polar science diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last presenter, Monika.
Yes, I have a very difficult task to to be in time. I will speak about Polish polar science diplomacy. And my perspective on science diplomacy is a bit broader, but still not this one. A bit broader because, yeah, that's the one. Okay.
It looks like,
yeah,
Monika,
it's
yours, that the Italian slide has been saved under your name. Okay.
Right.
Well,
So I was going to talk about the institutional dimension, the scientific dimension of Polish polar science diplomacy, as well as normative dimension. As far as the institutional dimension is concerned, the scientific community cooperates with the other stakeholders. So, for instance, with the ministries, with the executive agencies, mainly through the Committee on Polar Research of the Polish Academy of Sciences, and we are also structured in a network organization which is called Polish Polar Consortium. And yeah, we are also a member of the European Polar Board. Poland from 2020 has a polar strategy. And from 2017, we also have a strategy on polar research. And as in the case of Italy, we are also right now about to modify, about to update the Polish polar strategy in order to respond to the geopolitical changes and circumstances, but also to challenges or phenomena such as research security or securitization of research, technological change, and all those new phenomena. And as far as scientific activity is concerned, Poland has quite a rich history of polar expeditions, going back to the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century. Currently, we have 5 research stations in the Arctic. One research station in Hornsund is all-year station, responsible mainly for the geophysical monitoring, but there are also we are also hosting research projects, especially in the spring and summer seasons. Apart from that, we have 4 other university stations, which are seasonal stations, and yeah, success. Oh, sorry. And just recently opened in, well, actually this year, the Logistics and Research Center Bera in Longyearbyen in Svalbard. And in order to prepare for certain changes that might occur for those researchers who conduct research in Svalbard, we started, and apparently we successfully finalized a memorandum of understanding with Greenland to set up and open a new research station. I think it's Disco Island location. So it will be another university research station coordinated by the University of Wrocław. We are also present in the Antarctica. So currently there is one all-year station, Arctowski Polish Antarctic station. There was also the second one, Dobrowolski station, and we are right now in a moment of constructing a completely new Arctowski station, very modern. I will show you also the picture later on. But science diplomacy is not only about international scientific cooperation and research infrastructure, but it's also about being present internationally and cooperating with the other stakeholders, such as being present in international organizations, in expert bodies. So Poland, as a state with observer status in the Arctic Council. We are present in 2 working groups, so our experts are involved in 2 working groups, but as you can see here, the one of probably element of Polish visibility, especially in the Arctic, is the Warsaw format. So it's a gathering of observers to the Arctic Council with the current chairship of the Arctic Council, and also the other platforms, the organizations that refer to Antarctica and the Arctic. So these are the stations that we have both in the south and in the north, so Arctic and Antarctica. And the last one is that's a visualization of the new Arctowski Antarctic station, which is currently under construction. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And that was a very impressive start, how to say off the top of your mind without the slides. That was very well done. Thank you very much. And yes, so we have a bit of time for questions, debates. Jonas, do we have questions from the audience? And otherwise, I warn the audience that I know many people in the audience, so it'll be cold calling if there are no questions coming up. So, hang on. That's a very good question from Kerim Hestnes from University of Bergen. How do we as scientists secure a shift away from a history of colonial science in the polar regions and a race to establish new national research stations? Can I ask very brief reactions? I'll start with you, Sara.
Thank you. Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I think that's exactly what we need to ensure doesn't happen. We have to turn around the course of history in terms of how exploration and research and knowledge production has played a role and been a driver of colonization. So it's something that I think requires a change of mindset in what is in whose good. We often hear, the term in the name of a common good or in the name of a greater good. But as we've seen with indigenous peoples from all over the world, we are often not included in that greater good. So I just call and remind all institutions and researchers to be cognizant of that and think about how you yourself will have to change your mindset to not repeat the colonial structural inequities that we still operate and live under, also within science. I dare to say, actually, that science is biased. And it is certainly in the sense of not recognizing often the knowledge of indigenous peoples, for example, or its own role in reproducing power inequities. So I think it requires an individual change of mindset, but also a structural and institutional addressing through research ethics and research governance that is informed and also upholds the rights of indigenous peoples, and that's why we call for a human rights approach to all matters related to knowledge production. Ragnar.
Thank you very much. What are the indicators of successful polar science diplomacy? Anybody who would like to take that? Let's take the last one, the one at the bottom. What are the indicators of successful polar science diplomacy? Monika.
Well, I see two problems with this question. First of all, I have a problem with the term polar science diplomacy, which refers mainly to the polar part, because as we know, at least if we refer, for instance, just to the Arctic, there is no one Arctic. So that's one of the problems. The other problem refers generally speaking to the concept of science diplomacy, because how can we evaluate whether this science diplomacy is successful and the other is not successful if we do not have still methodologies that would evaluate effectiveness of science diplomacy. So that would be my answer. So answer without the answer. Sorry.
Ólafur, quick response.
Well, the quick response is we have to acknowledge that we are in a state where there are monumental failures in polar science diplomacy. It is easy listening to all these excellent presentations to get the impression that a lot of things are going on in polar science. Yes, to some extent they are. But there are enormous gaps. And we are, as human race, in the very early stages in understanding from a science point of view the ice-covered areas of the planet. I prefer often to call it the ice-covered areas of the planet, because it's not just Arctic and Antarctica, it's also the Himalayas or the third poles, where there are tens and thousands of glaciers. And China is the only country in the Himalaya region which has a scientific institute studying the glaciers in the Himalaya regions. India, which has over 10,000 glaciers on the Indian side of the Himalayas, has less than 10 glaciologists. There's less than 1 per 1,000 glaciers on the Indian side of the Himalayas. And the fact of the geopolitical state of affairs today is that if we wanted to bring together at a conference 50 to 100 the best polar scientists in the world, we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it. So I think the first priority is to address how do we deal with the fundamental failures and the barriers at the present of global polar science.
Thank you. And we have to conclude now, but I will give a last very brief word to Zhao, Peter and Francesca. Very brief to respond.
Well, my immediate response would be the best indicator of successful science diplomacy is when the scientists and scientific community could still sustain the unique channel of communication during these turbulent geopolitical tensions. Sometimes I'm quite confused, as President Grímsson said. We always advocating that science diplomacy is a unique one compared to other types of diplomacy. But in the practice, it's always been stuck by those political tensions, constraints, And there's a certain rules, for example, for the European, scientists or colleagues to be engaged with Russians against this the war in Ukraine context. And for China, I think we are committed that although we have a lot of disagreements in the different domains with European countries, but we'll still, as our institute did in the last decades, we're still very interesting in track two dialogues, in think tank to think tank collaboration. Even among those individuals, we could maintain very low and basic level of the communication. That makes science diplomacy matters.
Thank you very much. Peter, very briefly.
Very briefly, I will use the language of the European Union now in the FP10 and the MFF and say security. I will first say knowledge security. That is an indicator of if we are doing well with polar science diplomacy. And that knowledge should be produced with indigenous knowledge systems, because only by doing that we will have the full picture that we need to move forward in a successful and respectful way. Secondly, climate security. That is also an indicator. If we can, with joined forces and all shared resources, see that we are going in the right direction towards climate change, we have a positive indicator. And third and lastly, resource security. Risk management of the resources in the poles used, again, in a respectful way, of course, to develop societies, but also to protect the global development.
Thank you very much, Peter. Francesca.
Is it working? Yes. Well, I think that science diplomacy is also related to the capacity of scientists to communicate in an appropriate way scientific results to policymakers. And it also is related to the capacity of policymakers to retain these results in the most appropriate way in order to convert scientific advice into policies having an impact on society. So I think that we should also consider that it is essential to create a common field of understanding between different stakeholders, which is not an automatic process, as we know that interests of scientists do not coincide with the interests of policymakers, and they speak two different languages. So I think that one of the key points is to create a common language of understanding between different components and different parties.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much. We were given. I beg your pardon?
I thought you were going to invite first.
Monika, you already spoke, right, on the efficiency.
Yeah.
Yes. So Jonas, I apologize. We were told to end at 20 past. Didn't quite manage that, but thank you so much to my fellow panelists. Very, very stimulating discussion, and people who spoke very clearly without their notes suddenly. Very impressive. Thank you. Thank you for excellent questions from the audience. And anything practical, Jonas? We just go to get our coats and go to the reception now.
Yes, we'll go to the reception now.
Yeah. Good. Thank you so much.